Dante Rossi walked into room 502 by mistake. The woman lying there was dying completely alone. No flowers, no cards, no visitors. And what she whispered to him in that moment would absolutely destroy anyone who heard it. This is a story you need to hear. You need to know what happened 6 months later. He wasn't a good man. He didn't belong in hospitals. He belonged in boardrooms where deals were signed in blood, in warehouses where questions were answered with silence. But on October 12th, he walked into the wrong hospital room and met a dying woman who would become his wife. What she told him about her betrayal, what he did next, and what happened at the altar would make anyone believe in miracles. This ending would wreck you. His grandmother had fractured her hip at St. Jude's Medical Center. Room 502. He was running late, rain on his coat, the kind of cold October rain that soaked through everything. 2 of his men trailed behind, guns hidden beneath tailored suits, eyes scanning every face in the corridor. He carried sunflowers, bright yellow, almost absurd against the gray hospital walls. Rosa Rossi would have loved them. She'd always said sunflowers were proof that God had a sense of humor. He pushed open the door without knocking. He never knocked. The woman in the bed wasn't his grandmother. She was younger, maybe 30, deathly pale, so thin her collarbone jutted sharp beneath the hospital gown, hooked up to machines that beeped softly. Dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. IVs ran into her arm, another into her chest. The kind of setup that didn't whisper hope. It screamed, dying. The room was empty. Painfully, devastatingly empty. No flowers, no cards, no balloons with cheerful messages, no photos taped to the wall, no jacket draped over the visitor's chair. Just cold medical equipment, white walls that seemed to press in, and that hollow, rhythmic beeping that screamed a word louder than any sound he'd ever heard. Alone. She turned her head slowly, like even that small movement cost her something. Her eyes found his, pale gray, exhausted, haunted, but not afraid. Something in the universe shifted. Dante Rossi had stared down men twice his size. He had ended wars with a single nod. He had walked into rooms knowing someone wouldn't walk out alive. He had built an empire on fear and respect. But when her eyes met his pale gray, exhausted, haunted, he felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. He felt uncertain. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She didn't press the call button or demand to know who he was. She smiled. It was faint, fragile, heartbreaking. The kind of smile that suggested she'd forgotten how her face was supposed to arrange itself into happiness, but was trying anyway. "I think you have the wrong room," she said softly, her voice barely carrying across the space. Then her eyes drifted to the sunflowers in his hand. Something flickered across her face recognition. Longing, grief. Her breath caught. "But it's okay. I haven't had a visitor in a very long time." Her voice cracked when she added, "Those are beautiful." The way she said it, like she'd forgotten what beautiful things looked like. Like the sight of yellow petals was a small miracle in a world that had stopped offering her any. He should have left. He should have apologized, corrected his mistake, found his grandmother, forgotten this woman existed. That's what Dante Rossi did. That's what the devil of Newark did. He didn't stand in hospital rooms, staring at dying strangers. He didn't feel his chest tighten when a woman smiled at sunflowers like they were the first good thing she'd seen in months. He didn't wonder who had left her here to die alone. But he didn't leave. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His men stayed in the hallway, confused but obedient. They'd seen him kill without hesitation. They'd never seen him hesitate without killing. He crossed the room and set the sunflowers on the table beside her bed, arranging them so she could see them without turning her head. The plastic chair creaked when he pulled it closer and sat. For the first time in years, he didn't check the door or watch the clock. He stayed. "How long?" he asked, his voice quieter than he'd intended. She understood what he meant. She understood immediately. That's what loneliness did. It made you fluent in the language of abandonment. 40 days, she whispered softly. 40 days. No visitors. No flowers. No one to hold her hand when the pain got bad or tell her it would be okay, even when they both knew it wouldn't be. Something dark and dangerous settled in his chest. Not anger. Worse. Purpose. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said the words that would change everything. "You're not alone anymore. Before we continue, I need your help. We're on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers, and every single subscription gets us closer to that goal. If you enjoy stories about complicated love, about people who choose each other despite the odds, please hit that subscribe button. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop a comment and tell me your city or country. Building this community means everything, and knowing where you all are from makes it even more special. Isabella Cross smiled at him like he'd just said the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. Maybe he had. Maybe in a world where everyone else had walked away, a stranger's promise to stay was the closest thing to a miracle she'd get. From that moment on, she was his to protect, and he was hers to save. He told himself he wouldn't come back the next day. He told himself this was a moment of weakness, a strange detour in an otherwise ruthless life. He came back the next day anyway. And the day after that. And every day after that, until the sunflowers on her bedside table were no longer a mistake meant for someone else, but a promise meant only for her. Dante Rossi returned the next day at 2:47 p.m. He told himself it was on his way to another meeting. It wasn't. St. Jude's Medical Center was 20 minutes in the opposite direction. He brought soup, homemade minestrone from his personal chef, still warm in a thermos, bread wrapped in linen. He didn't know why. He didn't ask himself why. If he asked, he might have to answer, and the answer would complicate things he couldn't afford to complicate. Isabella was awake when he walked in. The sunflowers were still there, bright against the white walls. She turned her head and smiled, and something in his chest loosened. "You came back," she said softly, not surprised, relieved. "I said you weren't alone anymore," he replied, setting the thermos on the table. "I meant it." She watched him unpack the soup with an expression he couldn't name. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper. Like she was memorizing him. Like she was afraid if she blinked too long, he'd disappear. He fed her himself, small spoonfuls. She was too weak to hold the bowl. Her hands trembled when she tried. He didn't comment on it. He just took the spoon from her fingers and did what needed to be done. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said. On the third day, he arrived with books, old novels, poetry, things he thought she might like. She told him she'd been a kindergarten teacher before everything fell apart. Her voice went soft when she talked about the kids, their drawings, their questions, the way they hugged too tight and believed in magic. "They used to bring me dandelions," she said, staring at the sunflowers. "They thought they were treasures." "They were," Dante said. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and asked the question he'd been waiting for. "Who are you? Not what are you? Who?" "Dante," he said. "Dante Rossi." Recognition flickered across her face. She'd heard the name. Everyone in Newark had heard the name. But she didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She just nodded slowly. "I'm Isabella," she said. "Isabella Cross." By the fourth day, 2 armed men stood permanently outside room 502. The nurses noticed. They whispered. The hospital administrator made a nervous phone call that went unanswered. No one asked Dante to leave. No one dared. Isabella noticed too. "Why are they here?" she asked, glancing toward the door. "To make sure no one bothers you," he said simply. "No one's been here in 40 days, she said, trying to smile. "I don't think anyone's coming." His jaw tightened. "They're not here for who might come. They're here for who might try to make me leave." She blinked at him. "Why would you leave?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. He wouldn't, not unless she asked him to, and maybe not even then. On the 5th night, Dante stayed late. The machines beeped, softly. The hallway lights dimmed. Isabella's breathing was shallow, labored. The pain was getting worse. He could see it in the way her fingers gripped the sheets, the way her jaw clenched when she thought he wasn't looking. "Tell me something," she whispered into the darkness. "Something true." He leaned back in the chair, hands folded, eyes on her face. "I've killed men," he said quietly. "A lot of men." She didn't react, didn't gasp or cry or judge. She just looked at him with those exhausted gray eyes and asked, "Did they deserve it?" "Most of them," he said honestly. "Then you're not a monster," she said softly. "You're just tired." Something broke inside him, something he didn't know could still break. He reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold, fragile, impossibly small in his. He held them carefully, like they might shatter. "Why are you really here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He looked at their joined hands, at the sunflowers wilting slowly on the table, at this woman who was dying and still managed to smile. And he told her the truth he'd been avoiding since the moment he walked through that door. Because no one else is. She closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. And then she asked the question that would change everything. "Dante," she whispered, "where is my husband?" The silence that followed Isabella's question was the kind that could suffocate. Dante didn't move, didn't blink. But inside, something cold and calculated began to turn. "Your husband," he repeated slowly. She nodded, eyes still closed, tears still falling. Greg Miller. Her voice broke. She tried again. "He was here. At first, when they told me it was cancer. Stage 4. He held my hand during the first appointment." Dante said nothing. He waited. He was good at waiting. Predators always were. By the second appointment, he stopped coming. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. By the third, he stopped answering my calls. 2 weeks after they moved me to palliative care, he served me divorce papers. Right here, in this bed. Dante's grip on her hand tightened. Not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor. "He said he couldn't do it," Isabella said. And now she was crying openly, silently, like she'd done this so many times she'd learned how to do it quietly. "He said watching me die would destroy him, that he needed to move on, that I'd understand." "Did you sign?" Dante asked, his voice flat. "Yes," she whispered. "What was I supposed to do? Force him to stay? Watch him resent me while I died?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "What else?" She opened her eyes and looked at him. "What? What else did he take?" Her face crumpled. "How did you know?" "Because men like him always take more than they're owed," Dante said quietly. "Tell me." She took a shaky breath. "The house. He sold it before the divorce was finalized. Said he needed the money to start over. Our savings account, he emptied it. My grandmother's jewelry, the pieces she left me gone. He said he'd sold them to cover my medical bills, but I never saw the money." Dante's jaw clenched. "How much debt?" $300,000, she said, her voice hollow. "Maybe more now. I stopped checking. What's the point? I'll be dead before they can collect." She tried to smile. It was the saddest thing Dante had ever seen. "He sent me a text message," she continued, staring at the ceiling. "After the divorce was final, after he took everything, it said, 'I'm sorry, I can't do this. I hope you understand.'" She laughed, bitter and broken. 5 years of marriage, that's what I got. A text message. Dante didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. Because if he spoke, the words would come out wrong. Too sharp, too dangerous, too revealing. Isabella looked at him. Really looked at him. And something in his expression made her go still. "Dante?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands still holding hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came before storms. "Greg Miller," he said slowly, carefully, like he was memorizing every syllable. "What does he do?" "Corporate real estate developer," she said quietly. "Why?" Dante didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked another. "Where does he live now?" "I don't know," she said. "I haven't heard from him in 2 months." "Dante, why are you asking me this?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that should have terrified her. But it didn't, because it wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the man who had left her here to die alone. "Because," Dante said quietly, his voice soft and deadly, "he is going to regret the day he learned your name." Isabella's breath caught. "Dante, no, you can't." "I can," he said simply, "and I will." "I don't want revenge," she whispered. "I just want—" Her voice broke. "I just wanted someone to stay." Dante brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Gentle, reverent, the way men kiss the hands of queens. "I am staying," he said. "But I'm also making sure you never have to worry about anything again. Not the debt. Not the man who abandoned you. Not anything. If this story is giving you all the feels, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Stories like this take time and heart to create, and your support means everything. Also, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me what you think of Dante and Isabella's story so far. Are you Team Dante? Let me know. She started to cry again. But this time, it was different. This time, someone was there to catch the tears. That night, after Isabella fell asleep, Dante made a phone call. 3 words, that's all it took. Find Greg Miller. By morning, he would have an address, a list of assets, a detailed record of every deal, every transaction, every woman Greg Miller had been seen with since he walked out of this hospital 2 months ago. Dante Rossi didn't believe in forgiveness, but he believed in balance. The hospital administrator arrived at his office at 6:47 a.m. to find 3 men in expensive suits sitting in his waiting room. They hadn't made an appointment. They didn't need to. By 7:15 a.m., Isabella Cross's medical debt no longer existed. The payment arrived in cash. Bundled stacks of $100 bills in a black duffel bag that smelled faintly of metal and smoke. $347,000. Exact change. The administrator didn't ask questions. Men who brought that kind of money in duffel bags didn't appreciate questions. By 9 a.m., Isabella was moved to a private suite on the top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. A real bed, not a hospital cot. A bathroom with a shower. A couch where Dante could sleep instead of that plastic chair that had been destroying his back for a week. She woke up confused, disoriented, gripping the sheets like she thought she was dreaming. "What happened?" she whispered. "Where?" "You needed a better room," Dante said simply, sitting in a chair by the window, coffee in hand. "So I got you a better room." "Dante," she said slowly, looking around at the space that was bigger than some apartments. "What did you do?" "I took care of it," he said. "Took care of what?" "Everything." She stared at him. "The debt. Gone." "Dante, that was over $300,000. "I know what it was," he said calmly. "It's handled." Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't pay you back." "I don't want you to," he said. "Dante." "Isabella," he said, standing and crossing to her bedside. He took her hand. "You don't owe me anything. You never will. Do you understand?" She didn't understand. How could she? She'd spent 2 months watching people abandon her. And now this man, this dangerous, impossible man, was erasing her debts like they were nothing. That afternoon, a doctor arrived. Not one of the overworked residents who'd been managing her care. A specialist. Flown in from Zurich. Dr. Heinrich Vogel. Pale, nervous, impeccably dressed, and very aware that refusing this consultation was not an option. He examined Isabella for 2 hours, reviewed her scans, her blood work, her treatment history. When he finally emerged, Dante was waiting. "There's an experimental treatment," Dr. Vogel said carefully, his English precise. "A clinical trial in Geneva. Very new. Very expensive. Very—" He paused, choosing his words. "Risky." "What are her chances?" Dante asked. "Without it? Weeks. Maybe a month." Dr. Vogel adjusted his glasses. "With it? 30% chance of remission. Maybe less. The side effects are severe. But she could live," Dante said. "She could," Dr. Vogel said quietly. "If she survives the treatment." Dante looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "If she doesn't survive, doctor, neither do you." Dr. Vogel went pale. But he nodded, because he understood something in that moment. This wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And Dante Rossi's promises were absolute. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled office building in downtown Newark, Greg Miller's life was quietly coming apart. His assets were frozen. Every account, every investment. The IRS received an anonymous tip about unreported income. The New Jersey State Bar received documentation of ethics violations. His biggest client received a folder containing photographs and receipts that ended their partnership immediately. No blood was spilled. No bones were broken. No threats were made. Dante Rossi didn't need violence. He had something better. He had information. He had connections. He had the kind of power that could erase a man without ever touching him. Greg Miller would wake up in 3 days to find himself unemployed, under investigation, and utterly alone, just like he'd left Isabella. Balance. That evening, Dante sat with Isabella and told her about the treatment. She listened quietly, her hand in his, her eyes on his face. 30%. she said when he finished. 30%, he confirmed. And if I don't do it? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Then I stay with you until the end, however long that is. She smiled, sad and soft. What did I do to deserve you? You smiled at sunflowers, he said simply. And you didn't run when you learned my name. Isabella took a breath. Then another. Then she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Dante kissed her forehead. You're going to live, he said. Not a hope, a command. But 3 days later, when Dr. Vogel returned with the first round of treatment, he pulled Dante aside and said the words that made even the devil of Newark feel something close to fear. No matter how much power you have, Mr. Rossi, Dr. Vogel said quietly, you cannot control whether this works. The cancer will decide. Her body will decide, not you. And for the first time in 20 years, Dante Rossi felt powerless. The treatment was hell. There was no other word for it. The medication burned through her veins like fire. She vomited until there was nothing left. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her skin turned gray. Her weight dropped until she looked like a shadow of the woman Dante had met 3 weeks ago. And through all of it, Dante stayed. He held her hair back when she was sick. He changed the cold compresses on her forehead. He read to her when she was too weak to keep her eyes open. He slept in the chair beside her bed sometimes 2 hours a night, sometimes not at all. His men brought him clothes, food he didn't eat, messages he didn't read. His empire could wait. The meetings could wait. The enemies circling his territory could wait. Isabella couldn't. On the 8th day of treatment, she woke in the middle of the night to find him standing at the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. She'd never seen him like this, tense, uncertain, almost afraid. Dante? She whispered. He turned immediately, crossing to her bedside. What do you need? Water? Another blanket? She said softly. I need you to talk to me. He sat, taking her hand carefully. It was so small now, so fragile. He was terrified of breaking her just by holding on too tight. What do you want me to say? He asked. The truth, she said. You're scared. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. Not to her. Yes, he said quietly. Of what? He looked at their joined hands. At her pale face. At the machines that kept beeping, kept measuring, kept reminding him that her life was hanging by a thread. Of losing you, he said. I've faced down men with guns. I've walked into ambushes. I've had contracts put on my head, and I've never been afraid. But this... His voice caught. Isabella, I'm terrified. She squeezed his hand weakly. Why? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and said the words he'd been holding back for 2 weeks. Because I love you. Silence. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Dante. I know, he said quickly. I know it's too soon. I know you're sick. I know this is the worst possible time. But I can't. He stopped. Started again. I can't watch you fight for your life every day and not tell you. I love you. I've loved you since you smiled at those sunflowers like they were the first beautiful thing you'd seen in months. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I'm dying, Dante. No, he said firmly. You're fighting. What if the treatment doesn't work? Then I will love you for however long we have, he said. And I will make sure every single day you have left is filled with everything you've been missing. Sunflowers, books, people who care. A man who will never, ever leave. Isabella reached up with her free hand and touched his face. I love you too, she whispered. I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first day. Maybe when you brought me soup. Maybe when you told me I wasn't alone. But Dante, I love you. And I'm so scared I won't get to keep you. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. You will, he said. You will keep me, I promise. If you're feeling this story in your soul right now, please don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber helps us keep creating stories that matter. And I want to know, have you ever had someone show up for you when everyone else walked away? Tell me in the comments. Your stories inspire these stories. They stayed like that for a long time, foreheads pressed together, hands clasped. 2 people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow created something beautiful. 3 weeks later, the treatment ended. Isabella was a ghost of herself. 72 pounds, bald, weak, but alive. Dr. Vogel scheduled the scans for the following week. The results would take 3 days to process. 3 days to find out if she would live or die. 3 days of waiting, of holding her hand, of praying to a God Dante hadn't spoken to in 20 years. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Vogel walked into Isabella's room with a folder in his hands and an expression on his face that Dante couldn't read. Isabella gripped Dante's hand so hard her knuckles went white, and their entire future hung in the silence before Dr. Vogel spoke. Dr. Vogel opened the folder. He looked at the scans, then at Isabella, then at Dante. And for the first time since he'd arrived from Zurich, he smiled. "Remission," he said quietly. The word hung in the air like a prayer answered. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. "What?" "Complete remission," Dr. Vogel repeated, his voice stronger now. "The scans are clear. No tumors. No abnormal cells. Miss Cross, the cancer is gone." She stared at him, then at Dante, then back at the doctor, like she was afraid to believe it. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm sure," he said. Isabella broke. She sobbed into her hands, her whole body shaking. Dante pulled her into his chest, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. He pressed his face into her hair, what little had started to grow back, and for the first time since he was a child, Dante Rossi cried. Not from pain, not from loss, from relief so overwhelming it shattered every wall he'd ever built. Dr. Vogel quietly left the room. When Isabella finally pulled back, her face was soaked with tears, but she was smiling, really smiling. Not the fragile, heartbreaking smile from before. A real one. "I'm going to live," she said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "You're going to live," Dante confirmed, cupping her face in his hands. "And you're coming home with me." "Home? I don't have an apartment anymore," she said quietly. "Greg sold everything. I don't have anywhere to go." "You have me," Dante said, "and I have a house, a very big house, with room for a woman who deserves sunflowers and safety and every good thing she's been denied." 2 weeks later, Isabella walked out of St. Jude's Medical Center on Dante's arm. She was still thin, still weak, but alive, so beautifully, impossibly alive. The Rossi estate sat on 12 acres in Alpine, New Jersey. Stone walls, iron gates, gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. It looked like a fortress, because it was. But when Isabella walked through those gates for the first time, she didn't see a fortress. She saw home. Dante showed her everything. The library filled with books. The kitchen where his chef prepared meals that actually tasted like love. The bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. And the garden. God, the garden. Roses and lilies and sunflowers, Isabella whispered, her hand over her heart. An entire field of them. Bright yellow against the green grass, swaying in the wind. "I had them planted," Dante said quietly, "while you were in treatment." She turned to him, tears in her eyes again. Good tears this time. "Why?" "Because you said they were beautiful," he said. "And I wanted you to have beautiful things waiting for you." One evening, 3 months later, Dante took her to the overlook. The sky was bleeding gold and red, the Hudson River reflecting fire. He dropped to one knee. Isabella's breath caught. The ring was old, heavy, a diamond worn by generations of women who had married into the Rossi family. Women who had married dangerous men and survived them. Women who had turned monsters into husbands. "Isabella Cross," Dante said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "I am not a good man. I have blood on my hands. I have enemies who would hurt you just to hurt me. I am dangerous and broken, and more flawed than you will ever know." He paused. "But I will spend the rest of my life making sure nothing ever touches you again. I will protect you. I will love you. I will give you every sunflower in the world if it makes you smile. Marry me. Not because it's safe, but because it's real." Isabella looked at the ring. At the man holding it. At the life he was offering her, complicated, dangerous, but undeniably real. She thought about Greg. About the man who had promised forever and delivered abandonment. About dying alone in a hospital room with no visitors for 40 days. And then she thought about Dante. About the man who had walked into the wrong room and stayed anyway. About the man who had held her hair back while she vomited. About the man who had cried when she lived. "Yes," she said, Yes, I'll marry you. They married in the private chapel on the estate. Small, intimate, sacred. His men stood as witnesses, hardened criminals in tailored suits, watching their boss marry a kindergarten teacher, and crying openly when Dante kissed his bride. Even monsters believed in miracles when they saw them. 1 year later, Isabella stood in the garden, morning sunlight warming her face, watching the sunflowers sway. Her hair had grown back, soft and dark, touching her shoulders now. She'd gained weight. Color had returned to her cheeks. She looked alive, because she was. In her arms, she held their daughter, Sofia Rosa Rossi, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, born at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, screaming like she owned the world. Maybe she did. She was, after all, the daughter of a mafia don and a woman who had beaten death. Dante stood in the doorway of the estate, watching them, his wife, his daughter, his entire world in one perfect frame. A gun rested on the table beside him. Old habits died hard. But next to it sat a baby bottle, half empty, still warm. The contrast wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 34 years building an empire on fear, and in one moment, one wrong turn into one hospital room, everything had changed. He'd found something worth more than power, worth more than respect, worth more than all the blood and violence and control. He'd found purpose. Isabella turned and saw him watching. She smiled that same smile that had stopped him cold a year ago, and walked toward him, Sofia cooing softly against her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, stepping into the circle of his arms. Dante looked down at his daughter, at her tiny fingers wrapped around Isabella's thumb, at her dark eyes, his eyes blinking up at the world with perfect trust. "Miracles," he said quietly. Isabella leaned her head against his chest. "Do you believe in them now?" He pressed a kiss to her hair, then to Sofia's forehead. "I walked into the wrong room looking for my grandmother," he said. "And I found my wife. I found my soul. I found my reason for everything." He pulled them both closer. "Yes, Isabella. I believe in miracles, because I'm holding 2 of them." She lifted her face and kissed him, soft, sweet, full of everything they'd survived together. Somewhere in downtown Newark, Greg Miller sat in a 1-bedroom apartment he could barely afford, scrolling through social media, and saw the announcement. Isabella Cross, Isabella Rossi, now had given birth to a healthy baby girl. The photo showed her smiling, glowing, held by a man whose face Greg didn't recognize but whose eyes promised violence to anyone who threatened his family. Greg closed the app. He'd lost everything. His career, his reputation, his money, and for what? Because he'd been too weak to stay. Balance, as promised. Back at the estate, Dante carried his daughter inside, while Isabella picked fresh sunflowers for the kitchen table. Life was good. Life was whole. Life was everything it was supposed to be when you chose to stay instead of run. And in a world where men like Dante Rossi weren't supposed to get happy endings, this felt like the biggest miracle of all. Thank you for listening to Dante and Isabella's story. If this journey moved you, if it made you believe in second chances, and the kind of love that shows up when everyone else walks away, please hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep creating stories that matter. We have so many more stories waiting for you. Stories about complicated people finding extraordinary love in unexpected places. Check out our other videos. You might just find your next favorite story. Drop a comment and tell me, what was your favorite moment in this story? Was it the sunflowers, the duffel bag of cash, the proposal? I read every single comment, and your thoughts mean the world. Until next time, remember, sometimes the wrong room is exactly where you're supposed to be.